So moving on from where we left off, I've made some minor changes to our shader network. So I have added 3 channels in the shader's properties: the normals, specular, and diffuse. And what they do is they allow me to insert my textures without having to go into my shader network itself. So the reason behind doing that is because as we build our shader network, it will become bigger and bigger, and it will become increasingly difficult to find this one special node that we need. So if we have it out here, it will be a lot easier. To create the channels, we can come down to set this gear icon and edit parameter interface. This window will pop up, and on the left side you will see a bunch of parameters that we can use. Right. So the one that we will be using is file image. So just drag and drop, and since we are creating the emissive today, I will just create one channel for it right now. So for the name, is what will show up when we do our copy parameter and references later on. So it's best not to have any spacebar on the name itself. As for label, is what you will see on your property channel later on. So we will call the name something like text emissive. And as for label, maybe something like emissive. So this is what will show up on our channel. So you click apply, and immediately you will see the emissive channel will be created. So the next thing I did was create an input for our code color using my specular. So to break up the specular loop that we already have previously, I've included a noise node. So this helps to break up the already created specular texture, and I've taken some of the values in there and fed these two passes through a layer RGBA. So what the layer RGBA does is it allows me to blend multiple passes together to edit through opacity or mix. And the cool thing about this is it offers a variety of blending modes for me to choose from. So here we can see there's overlay, over, burn, and multiple more that we can choose from. And they are relatively the same as what you'll see in a typical Photoshop blending modes, and they work relatively the same way. So that's the other thing that I've done. So I did a little render to show the difference between having code on and code off. You can see that between these two, there's a more shinier touch to the ship, making it more sci-fi and futuristic, and not as oxidized and rugged as what we have without the coat on. Okay, so next we will create the emissive shader inside our network that we've built previously. The reason behind doing that is so that we can control multiple inputs and animate them together from one property itself without having to split to multiple different ones to control. And also the other reason is if I have to create another shader, I will have to blast out another model, and that will cause more issues as I have to delete faces from our geometry which was not meant for this purpose. And also it will cause more issues with the RBD as it's already been fractured to multiple pieces. So to create the emissive, we can just come into our shader node, and right away I will just put down a image node. So instead of selecting from file name, I'll come out here and go to emissive, and I'll choose copy parameter. Go back in, and under file name I'll put paste relative reference. and immediately you will see the text emissive, which is what we've put under the name for our settings earlier on. So right here I can just choose my emissive texture. Okay, so to test, I'll just drag my out material and plug the shader directly into shader out. This way I can see whether if the setup is working. And yes, it's working. So then next I will just rename this node. And I'll put down a standard surface shader. Okay. So now there's two standard surface shader and only one output. So later on I will have to combine both these standard surfaces into a blend so that it will come out as one shader under one output. Okay, so I'll do that later. So for now, I'll just connect my emissive shader under emissive color. And right now you don't see anything, and that's because the emissive intensity is at 0. So if you push it to 1, you'll see a faint glow over there. The thing about the emissive is we can go further than 1. So if we type 10 like now, you can see it glows more intensely. And this white currently is a little distracting. It's not allowing me to see the full color range of my emissive. So under my standard surface, I'll go to base and specular and just bring it down to 0, and immediately you'll see that it becomes brighter and we are more focused on the emissive. Okay, so next I'll just put down a color correct to change the hue so that I don't have to go back and forth between Photoshop to change my color range whenever somebody decides to change the color. So I put down a color correct. Right, so right now there's nothing. But when I go under multiply and I choose a color, you can see that it updates right away to the color that we've chosen. So it's not exactly one-to-one to the color, but more of a multiplication of whatever we chosen under multiply into the original color. Okay, so now I'll just create two channels later on so that I can control my intensity and my hue change outside without having to go in all the time. So likewise, I will go under edit parameter interface, and this time I'll put a float. So the float is numbers with decimal and integer is whole numbers. So we'll be using float for our emissive. And I'll just rename the name and label to emissive intensity. So this controls the intensity of the light. So I'll just clamp it down to 10 since 10 is the number that we were using. Before we click accept, I'll put down a color. Okay. And I'll just rename it as well. So this will be my color, emissive color. I click accept and two channels will be created. So now I'll just link these both back into my shader. Just copy parameter and go in, and under emission, I'll just paste relative reference. Same goes for the color. Okay, so I just did a little test. Just do a little test, and so this is working fine. Okay. likewise. So now it's white, and I'll just do a little test by changing the color again. So the linking is working as well. Okay. Okay, so first I'll just rearrange and tidy up my nodes here a bit. I'll just minimize the standard surface and just move everything down a bit. Okay, so first I'll put down a cell noise node. So this cell noise node will help me to create the breaking up of the ship's light when it switches off. Okay, so under pattern I'll choose cell 2, and then I'll just tweak the octaves, luminosity, amplitude, and scale. But you can tweak to any values that you need to, because this solely depends on what model you are using. And if your model is larger, you'll need a bigger breakup, or if it's smaller, then it will become smaller scale than what I'm using. So this is depending on what's best for you, so you can experiment around with the values here. So these are the values that I'm using for now, and I'll plug all these node into a layer RGBA, and I'll put it under input 1, so it has a higher priority over whatever I'm gonna put later on. Just rename it to cell and leave the mix at 1. So next I'll put down a float to integer. So this will be a constant over when my cell noise switches off. When my cell noise switches off the intensity of the emissive, it will fall back to float to integer, where it's a constant, and it will always be 1, so it will always be switched on. So this will become some sort of master control over what I will be changing later on. Just rename it to float, and I will plug this into the main network using multiply. It will be under input 2. Okay. So then next I will connect my mix here to my density. So I'll do that through relative references again. Okay, so now when I change my mix, it will affect my density as well. And this will also cover up the emissive that was already created before. So I'm just testing around and it's working. Yeah. So density is the amount of noise that will be covering up our ship's intensity emissive. So the more density, the more it covers up. The lesser it is, the less you'll see, basically. So now I'll create a channel so that I can control without going into my shader network. And this I'll be using float. So I will rename it to something like controller. And the range, I'll clamp it down to 0 and 1, since the feed range in here for float maximum is 1. So I'll put this as 1, and I will clamp it down. Apply and accept. So it's there. I'll just copy this reference into my mix. So now it's at 0 and there's nothing. So if I bring it up, the light slowly appear, and it's appearing part by part using the noise and not through emissive intensity, where it just switches off everything instantly. So what I do is I base my light controller's animation on my RBD. So if the RBD goes off, I will do a slow in and slow out for my lights, so it doesn't look like it's going off directly again. Okay, so I'll just rename my standard surface here to emissive. And now I'll just bring both these shaders that we've built together and have one single output. So the way to do that is through layer shader. So the difference between layer shader and layer RGBA is, instead of controlling RGBAs, this uses allow us to mix multiple shaders together, and there's no blending modes involved. So the only thing we can tweak here is the mix, or rather the opacity. So when I plug in my mothership body and emission together, you'll see this. The emissive is gone, and that's because the mix for my sheet is at full 100% opacity. So if I bring it down to 0.5, the sheet's light will appear, right? So you have to balance out the mix to dictate what you want to show. So here I'll just rename the layers so that it's a bit easier for us to recognize later on. So I'll call it mothership body and mothership emissive. Okay, so now that's done. So out here you can control all the parameters, but normally I will just control the light controller and the color. I won't really touch the emissive, because if I turn it to 0, it will uniformly switch off everything. So I'll normally leave that and use the noise that we've created to affect. Yep. So like what I said just now, what I did was I followed the RBD for my lights animation. So since I have two animations of the explosion going off, I will depend on which part goes off, and then I will switch it off. Okay, so if you take a look at my reference, or rather what we've done here, you can see that when the first explosion goes off, the lights starts to dim, and then it does a little pop before it switches off again. Right, so here when the first explosion goes off, I pull it down, and to create a popping effect, I bring the light back up, and then I bring it down to another level before the second explosion goes off, and I repeat the same process before turning my light control to 0 completely, where there's no emissive appearing at all. Yep. So that way I will create this popping effect of the lights exploding before it goes off directly. Okay, so next we'll move on to building the light rigs and atmosphere for our shot.